Kenny, I know you've been sweating this. I know that you've been thinking about for a long time. How do I break this down? How do I do the Kenny Burchard This Is Your Life episode? Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Hello and welcome to another verified episode of On the Journey with Matt and Ken and Kenny. I'm Matt Swaim, at least according to my driver's license, and I'm 99% sure that really is Ken Hensley and Kenny Burchard. Gentlemen, welcome back. You ready to start a new series?
Yes, Kenny is.
Ready or not. Ready or not.
Yeah.
Well, Hensley, you don't have to be as ready because we're going to get to do to Kenny what you and I did a little while ago, which is kind of walk through on more of a granular level of our journeys to the Catholic Church. Now we're going to hear Kenny walk through the twists and turns of his. But if you want to go back and see the series I did, the series that Ken Hensley did, please go to chnetwork.org. All the On the Journey episodes are over there. You can also find our online community. You can link to that. It's community.chnetwork.org. Of course, all these things made possible due to our generous partners in mission, and you can join them if you'd like to support our work at chnetwork.org/donate. Kenny, I know you've been sweating this. I know that you've been thinking about for a long time. How do I break this down? How do I do the Kenny Burchard This Is Your Life episode? Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
I want to throw in something here, and that is that, Matt mentioned that we did this, I don't know, maybe about a year ago even.
Right.
We had done a number of series in which we took specific issues, and we basically said, what did we believe back when we were Protestant, and how did we come to believe what we believe now? We did that on Sola Scriptura. We did it on baptismal regeneration, did it on justification, did it on the Eucharist, many, many subjects. And then at a certain point, we decided, you know what, let's just stop and tell our own stories. Yeah. And I just want to say, Kenny, as an encouragement to you, that when I began telling my story, I had no idea whether it was going to be 2 episodes, 3, 4, 5. I think mine ended up being about 9 episodes. Mine ended up being 9 episodes because I'm full of myself, I guess. But,
you've also lived a little bit since then, so maybe you need to do another one just to catch us up on the past, 12 to 18 months.
Mine was twice as long as Matt's because I'm twice as old as Matt. But, anyway, it was a good experience. And so anyway, Kenny has been with us now for a long time. And we just thought, hey, we should do this with Kenny. We should let Kenny tell the story. So that's the background. And so I'm mainly just an observer, and I'm going to try and interject and throw you off the track as I can, as I'm able, and bring up subjects you don't want to talk about, possibly.
Sure. Yeah, I love the series that you guys did, and I had just started working at the Coming Home Network when you guys were launching that series. Matt was actually first, and so I was kind of cutting my teeth on being part of this team, and that series was unfolding, and I really loved it, and it put me in touch with kind of what we do as an apostolate, which isn't well, here's what Catholics believe, and here's the 5 reasons why. It's more relational apologetics and really embedded in story, that we all are on this journey. We're all on this story. God has been at work in history. He's at work in our lives. And we get to kind of show and tell what that looks like on an individual basis. And that's one thing I love about the Coming Home Network, is just the story side of things. So yeah, guys, it's an honor to be able to share my story a little bit today. And
to do that, Kenny, we're going to have to probably go back to before you were born in order to help make sense.
We actually are. Yeah.
What things happened once you got born.
Yep. Yeah. That's actually a really good place to start. My story in some ways is different from both of yours. I grew up I was born in 1969. I grew up so then in the 70s, came of age in the 80s, and I was born the child of two Catholics, interestingly, who weren't married. And my birth father was a Catholic who was married to a woman and had two daughters by her, but who was dating my mother on the side and secretly, and had me by her while he was still married and in the process of separation from his wife. So I was born out of wedlock to a Catholic girl, to a teenage Catholic girl in 1969. And she was from a Polish Catholic family, and my birth father was from had an Italian Catholic father, and so here are two Catholic young people, and they conceive me out of wedlock. Well, my mother grew up in a very strict my birth mother grew up in a very strict Polish Catholic family in Maryland. She grew up in a family where at the time her father would say things like, "If you ever get pregnant, don't come home." That was kind of the refrain that she grew up hearing. Like, if I ever get pregnant, I can't go home. And so she got pregnant. And she was also taught as a Catholic young girl, that sex outside of marriage was a sin, but she was taught correspondingly that abortion was a sin. So she was caught between a rock and a hard place, and she couldn't go home, and she couldn't do what many girls at the time were doing, finding a way to have an abortion. So she fled. My birth mother fled without her parents knowing. She said, "Well, I'm just going to go visit my brother in San Diego." And she was pregnant with me, several months pregnant with me, got into a car with friends, drove all the way across the family from Maryland to Central California, and stayed there until she gave birth to me in June of 1969. I was born at the Los Angeles hospital. And when she went in for, to deliver me, to give birth to me, she told them, "I'm not keeping this child. I'm giving this child up for adoption. My parents don't know that I'm even pregnant." And so she signed relinquishment papers. She had them, somehow she had them couriered to my birth father, and he signed relinquishment papers. I heard this story when I was 24, and I'll talk later about how I later met my biological parents when I was 24 years old, and that this filled in a lot of blanks for me. They told me the story. But when I found out from my birth mother, part of the reason that she gave me up was that she went to my birth father and told him, "I'm pregnant." And he basically said, "I can't deal with this right now. I've got a wife and two daughters, and I'm separated." And he said to her, according to my birth mother, he said to her, "Why don't you get rid of it?" So my birth father's first mention of me was to propose abortion, and referred to me as it. And so, but I didn't know that growing up. I just knew that I was given up, and I knew that my birth parents were Catholics. So I was relinquished in the hospital when I was a brand new baby, and left there. According to my birth mother, they brought her in a couple of days after I was born and made her sit with me in some room. They took 2 Polaroid pictures of me, which she gave me when I was 24 years old. I'd never seen brand new baby pictures of myself before, but she gave them to me when I was 24. And she had kept them her whole life, or my whole life. And she left me there, and I was turned over to the California adoption people. At the same time, this couple, my adoptive parents, were living in Los Angeles, where I was born. A young couple themselves who couldn't have children, and they had adopted my sister. They adopted her from Catholics as well, and they had her baptized as a Catholic. But with me, they didn't do that, which is something that'll come out here in a little while. But my parents on my biological side, then there's Catholic roots there. In fact, I tell my son, I was conceived by two Catholics who were rebelling against Catholic social teaching with respect to sexuality. So that's how I came into the world. But I stayed alive and was adopted because my mother was being obedient to Catholic teaching on the preservation of life. So you could say I had a mixed up conception, and birth there. Catholicism is woven into that in big ways. And I was adopted. I was adopted by my parents, who in 1969, well, actually it would have been 1970, in the spring of 1970, they had said, "Hey, we want a boy. We'll adopt a boy." And they were contacted, and they said, "We have a brand new boy. He's 8 months old. Do you want him?" And I had been in a foster family for 8 months before that. My adoptive parents were also, in their childhood, Catholics. My father was raised by, I think, a non-religious father and a Catholic mother who died actually of alcoholism, but she was raised by devout Catholic parents, and I grew up knowing them. That's where I learned the prayer, "Bless us, O Lord, in these thy gifts, which we are about to receive from thy bounty through Christ our Lord." I learned that at the dining room table of my Catholic great-grandfather, though we were not practicing Catholics ourselves. We were nothing. So my father kind of grew up around that. But when he was a young man, he rejected it. He rejected all religion completely. My mother, on the other hand, was a Dutch immigrant. She was brought into the United States when she was 13 years old, sometime after World War II. She grew up in a Catholic family. I have pictures of my mother as a 10, 11, 12-year-old girl in Holland with her Catholic schoolgirl uniform on. She went through all of the sacraments of initiation as a little girl. But things being what they were at that time in the world, my grandparents wanted to flee that part of Europe, and they were looking for a ticket out of there. And the LDS Church, the Mormon Church, gave them that ticket. All they had to do was convert to Mormonism. They could get permission to move to Utah, and they could start their lives over as Mormons. And that's what they did. So my mother's whole family converted from Catholicism to Mormonism, got permission from the U.S. government to immigrate to the United States, were dropped in Salt Lake City, Utah, and every one of them except one left the Mormon Church as soon as they hit the ground in the United States. And so I grew up with relatives who had been through sort of that migration of growing up Catholic, converting to Mormonism in a kind of expediency, and then leaving it, save one of my aunts and her family. And so all of those fingerprints, sort of those religious fingerprints, are on my family of origin and my family of adoption. And I learned all of this as I was growing up, because my parents were not afraid to have, conversations with me about my background and my history and my roots and theirs as well. And that's where I learned kind of all these stories of background. So the idea of having a religious family or a religious family of origin, it wasn't foreign to me, even though in our house there was no religion at all. We were not a church-going family at all. So I tell people, like, my dad was suspicious of religion and critical of religion and religious people, even handed mockery of all things religious and all people religious. My mom, on the other hand, was very religiously curious, and I would say spiritually eclectic, to the point where she would just buy into whoever was sitting her in front of her at the time, and that was the person that was sort of given the most authority. So I was kind of like in this back and forth growing up of my dad mocking religious people and my mom listening to every different kind of religious idea that you can, and I was kind of in this ping pong game between both of them. And that was the sort of the headspace that I was growing up into my infancy and my early elementary age. Maybe I'll just pause right there and take a breath.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what, as a young man, must you have thought about religion if you've got it? Well, of course, you don't know the situation with your birth parents at this point, but you do have some sense that religion can be something that is either compelled or merely cultural, or that somebody just says, "Oh, sure, I'll believe this to get a ticket to the United States." Or there are some interesting nuances to what you describe, but none of that says to me a deep and abiding personal relationship with Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. Like, I'm hearing lots of like stuff about religion, but I'm not hearing anything of that ilk in that story.
Well, I just want to say that, wow, your story is powerful already to me. And, I'm sure that as you got older, you probably felt a lot of profound things about this whole thing, where your origin story and all that. But I'm just wondering, as you're a child, do your parents just tell you were adopted and that's just normal? So you just feel normal, like you don't feel like you were missing anything, or you didn't feel like lost in some sense, or any of that kind of stuff.
Oh, sure. I can dive pretty deep into how I felt about adoption, which I might in a future episode actually, on this score. Yeah, I mean, I tell people one of the first words I learned was the word adopted, which can sound kind of funny, like mama, dada, adopted, because it was so normal in my family to talk about being adopted. And at that time, actually, in the United States, you could find people who were adopted who had no idea. And that maybe still happens, but it's not as common now as it was when I was a little kid, where people sometimes just didn't tell their kids they were adopted. They did with me. And in my case, that set off a whole range of, I don't know if you want to call it fantasy thinking or imaginations, or, like you're trying to imagine who these people are and what they must have been like. And the little facts that you do have, you try to fill them in as much as you can. And I did that kind of stuff. I was very curious about it, and my parents were very open. They did have, a one-page document that described who my birth parents were in very high-level terms. And one of the descriptors was their religious background. They were both listed as being Catholic. So I even learned that word when I was young, but I didn't really know what it was because we didn't go to church. We were not church-going people. I knew what my mother and father told me about Catholicism from a distance. I knew what it was like to see Catholic things when we would go to my great-grandparents' house, and I would see crucifixes and rosaries and hear the Catholic prayers and stuff, but never until we left, until I was 9 or 10 years old. I'd never even been in a Catholic church. So I just had my imagination to run away with me, and whatever my parents would tell me about church and religion and Catholicism, until I was about 8 years old. When I was 8 years old, my parents, who were not on the same page religiously, so they wouldn't give me any religion. In fact, they would say to me, "We had your sister baptized as a Catholic because she came from Catholic birth parents. With you, Kenny, we decided not to do that. We decided that maybe with you, we should just let you grow up and decide for yourself what you want to believe." And think about that. Like, that's a lot of pressure for a little kid, Well, I guess over the course of my life, I'll just find out all the religions in the world, what all of them mean. And then at some point I'll be smart enough to make up my own mind for myself. And so I kind of carried that weight with me all growing up, which will come out maybe next week when we talk about how I kind of sorted through some of that. But I always grew up knowing I had to decide for myself, about what my faith would be. And so it's curious then, with that kind of as a background, that on Easter Sunday, when I was 8 years old, so this would be like 1977, I guess, Easter Sunday, I come out into the living room in our we lived in Colorado at the time, in our little house that we lived in. I come out, and we always got Easter baskets when we were little kids. Well, when I was 8 years old, in my Easter basket, there was all the normal stuff, chocolate eggs and the plastic green grass and a little, I remember specifically a little paddle ball toy and, the chocolate Easter bunny and a white gift and award King James Bible with gold embossed words on the front of it, Holy Bible. And I was blown away. It was like this incredible gift that was given to me. And I reached down into my Easter basket and I pick this thing up and I hold it and it's got, Holy Bible, which to an 8-year-old's ears, that just sounds like this incredible language, Holy Bible, So even the name, Holy Bible, it's like, this is a special book. And it was one of those, I don't know if they even do them this way anymore, but it has all the pictures inside of it, right? This glossy, beautiful art, pictures of all kinds of different things, creation, Noah's Ark, David and Goliath, pictures in the New Testament. And I just thumb through it and I'm looking at it and I just know somehow this is just really important book. And I'm 8 years old and I'm not in a religious family at all. And so my mom is standing there, dad is standing there. And this is a conversation I never forgot my whole life because it was so weird to me, even as an 8-year-old, where I say to my mom, Holy Bible, like, what is it? Where does it come from? What's it about? Oh, I'm asking my mom.
That's awesome.
And my mom who grows up, in the confusion of a not very devoted Catholic family who converts to Mormonism out of convenience. They all leave it. She leaves everything and she leaves everything and goes into everything by the time she's my parent. So she's got lots of religious ideas. So all of that's kind of pressing down on her. And here's her 8-year-old little boy. She's given him a Bible and I'm holding it. What is it? So my mother says to me in what I call a confident and conspiratorial voice, the Bible is a religious book written by men long ago for the purpose of controlling the masses through religion. I remember telling that story later, and I would always end, because she didn't say this, but I would always end the story with Happy Easter.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, why did she give it to you? Why did she give it to you? If that was her attitude.
And here's why. It goes back to what I said earlier about my birth mother. Why was I conceived? Well, you could say going against the flow of what you had been taught in your Catholic upbringing. But why did I live? Going with what you were taught in your Catholic upbringing. Why give an 8-year-old little boy a Bible? Yeah. Somehow, inside of my mother's mind, which had been formed by her Catholicism when she was a little kid, there comes a time in the life of a child when you give him a Bible. So I hadn't been baptized and confirmed and all that kind of stuff, but still there was some muscle memory in there, I think, from my mother that she felt we should have a Bible. And maybe there were other people, talking to her about it, but that was an impulse that she had, and it was a good one, and it was actually really helpful to me.
It's like her coming to you and saying, "This is the opium of the masses. Now let me give you some." Let me shoot you up with the opium of the masses. Yeah, but I can see what you're saying. It's the same kind of thing where she's a divided person. On the one hand, she doesn't believe in religion anymore. It's to control people. On the other hand, the Bible, every kid should have a Bible. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that you see in a lot of different ways. And I've seen it certainly since I've become Catholic back in 2005 and having worked a little bit and observed some religious ed practices where you'll see some parents who will drop their kids off for religious ed and then turn around and go back home and never darken the doors of mass themselves. These parents don't go to mass, but something in them says, I should probably at least give my kids a little bit of something in this experience. And I feel like there's grace there. There can be grace.
There sure is. There is, and I think about that a lot now. Like I have friends that I was in ministry with who grew up Catholic and left Catholicism and became real Christians later, which I'll talk about. I say that in jest, but I'll talk about those in a future episode. And it's just so interesting to me that they became real Christians after they were, that they say became real Christians after they were Catholic. And always now my response to them is, so you grew up with a Jesus-looking view of God in your Catholic faith, and you still have that. Isn't that interesting? That you have this, you say that you have this real faith now that you didn't have when you were growing up. And yet all around you when you were growing up were crosses and Jesus and the Lord's Prayer and biblical texts and all this other stuff. And so, yeah, what you say there, Matt's really good. Like sometimes parents are doing things, they're raising their kids and they're doing good things, and grace comes through those things. Like do them all, do everything you know how to do. Sometimes though, God is at work in all of it. And sometimes it takes a while for those things to take root, as it did with me. I had that Bible all growing up. I would keep it on the shelf in my bedroom. I would sometimes pull it off the shelf and try to read it. And you hear this from people all the time, whether they're Catholic or not. I got to Genesis chapter 9 and gave up, or I got to Genesis chapter 6 and gave up. Well, that was me. Occasionally I'd flip ahead, to the red pages in the New Testament. But I thought, well, it's a book. You have to read it from start to finish. And I don't know if I'm ever going to get through this book. But there it was, the Bible. It was an enigma to me. It was speaking to me in some way. And I kept it with me through my whole life. And then when my parents a year later, my dad got a job transfer from Colorado, where we lived, over onto the other side of the Rocky Mountains with the same company into Salt Lake City. And so we moved. We crossed over the Rockies and we moved to Salt Lake City when I was 9 years old, 1 year after I got my Catholic Bible, or not my Catholic Bible, my Easter Bible. And we moved into the seat of Mormonism. In fact, I remember when we were telling all of our friends, we're going to move to Utah, one of my friends said, "Oh, the Mormons." And I can't remember that I had ever heard the words "the Mormons" in a sentence before. But then I thought, the Mormons, what's that? Oh, it's the religion of Utah. And so we moved to Utah, and I'm airdropped, into the middle of Mormonism, into the seat of Mormonism when I'm 9 years old. Now, I got spiritually curious after I got my Bible. So probably the last year that we were in Colorado, and as soon as we moved to Utah, I wanted to go to church because I figured if I have a Bible, I want to go to church. So I got my Bible when I was 8 years old, and there was a Sunday school bus that would roll through our neighborhood. And my parents said, you can get on the Sunday school bus that comes through the neighborhood. And it was a Baptist church down the street or something. So I was going to Sunday school, and I would take my little white Bible with me. And I don't remember everything I learned in those things, but I'm starting to get, Christian ideas put into my head by the Baptist Sunday school bus. And then when we moved to Utah, I discovered that my mom wants to keep me away from Mormonism. She doesn't want me going to church with Mormon friends or anything. But one of my aunts, the oldest in the family of my mother's siblings, had become a Lutheran. Remember, grew up Catholic, converted to Mormonism, left it. She married a Dutch guy who was a Lutheran, and they would go to the Lutheran church. And she'd say, if you want to go to church, you can go with my Aunt Joanne, and my cousins, Debbie, Cindy, and Rick. Those are their names. And they would take me to the Lutheran church when I was growing up. So I enjoyed that. I wanted to go to church. Neither of my siblings did, but I did. I was very curious about spiritual things, and I wanted to go to church. And I noticed when I was growing up in Utah that the topic of religion was normal. It was just normal. Everybody talked about God. Everybody had religious books. Everybody went to church. Like conversations about religion and God and Jesus and spiritual things were normal. But what I also noticed and started to tune into is how much disagreement there was about religious things, because I'm now dropped down inside of a city where there's a pervasive religion. And inside of that are other faiths and other Christianities that disagree with that. And so, and then my dad, who hates all of it and thinks all of it's a waste of time. So I'm kind of like there's fire, there's bullets flying in every direction. And yet religion is a pervasive topic when I get to Utah. It comes to me, I guess, at that time in my life. Religion is like a big deal for people. So pause there for a sec.
Yeah. So, but I find it fascinating that the religions you've brought up so far are all like big ticket, sort of major. I mean, you got Catholicism, you got the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you've got the Lutherans, which is sort of like the big old European Reformation. I mean, it's like the oldest kind of Protestantism there is, which is funny because I know where this story goes from here. And it's kind of like the antithesis of those three sort of like big old kinds of like iconic religions that are also, kind of structured around some kind of, like Catholicism obviously has like a major authority.
Yeah.
Latter-day Saints have like the quorum of the 12 apostles, right? You've got like a big sort of, I mean, Lutherans may be, kind of all over the place, but they do have some sense of like structure, if you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
So I just find this all fascinating to hear in the background, knowing what I know about you now.
Yeah, and the thing that's striking me here is just, well, I won't get off into sola scriptura, but because that doesn't really apply. The Mormons have authorities and things too, but for you to be young, because around this time you start going to this Lutheran church. How old are you?
I was 9 years old. I wanted to go to church as soon as I showed up in Utah. My cousin and I were about the same age, so I wanted to hang out with him, and they always went to church.
So a 9-year-old boy, and you're already exposed to, there's this Catholic thing. Now there's this Mormon thing. There's this Lutheran thing. My dad thinks it's all junk. My mom gives me a Bible, but she tells me at the same time that it's just written by men to control the world. What a confusing world.
Yeah, it's very confusing. And I add to that confusion just how I was growing up at home and what family life was like. There is no religion at home. There's no binding agent there keeping things together. It's just kind of like a bunch of marbles rolling around on a piece of plywood. Like nothing is together. It's just all over the place. And even sometimes I remember going, in fact, I made my mother a Mother's Day gift at the Lutheran Sunday school. And it's, you take a picture of yourself at Sunday school and you put it on a piece of wood and you put this clear glue on the top of it. And it glues the picture of you to the wood. And then you write on the back, Happy Mother's Day. I gave that to her. The picture of me was of me wearing the rock band Kiss and Gene Simmons and the devil face with the tongue sticking out of his mouth with a Kiss t-shirt on. Like that's what I wore to church. Like I wore my Kiss t-shirt to church. They took a Polaroid of me and then that's what I put on the Mother's Day gift at Sunday school. So like my life is totally confused. I don't have a root system that's one thing. It's just all kinds of things. My mother's spiritual eclecticism, the culture at large, Mormonism, Lutheranism, American life in the 70s, it's just all that stuff all swimming together. And me, this little kid who's told by his parents, you decide when you are old enough what you want to believe, so. But I'll tell you, as I look back on myself and I think of myself, that little kid wanted to believe something. He was open. He was spiritually open. He was curious. He knew there was something real out there, that God, the idea of God made sense to me, even as a little kid. Even though I think my first prayer when I was a little kid was, God, if you could just let me fly, I would believe in you. It was something like that. Anyway, the dumb prayer of a little kid. But there was a hunger and a desire to sort it all out and put it together. And always this voice in the back of my head, you decide, you decide, you decide.
Kenny, here it is straight from the Catechism. Paragraph 27, the desire for God is written in the human heart because man is created by God and for God, and God never ceases to draw man to himself. Only in God will he find the truth and happiness he never stops searching for, even at 9 years old.
Yeah. Amen. And I look at this, I look at the root system of my life, and it's all there. Like I do not come from a long line of pagans, even though the people in my life are spiritually mixed up, maybe morally mixed up, maybe mixed up in lots of different ways, but still in the root system that ends up, bringing me into the world, both biologically and familially through adoption. The root system of both of those families is, there's grace inside of both of those families that gets to me. It gets to me. It finds me in different ways. And then, of course, I'm growing up in Utah. Now, I have to fast forward a little here because I want to bring at least this part of the story to some kind of crescendo. Like, well, what happened to you? And how in the world did you become a Christian? Well, as you can imagine, as my curiosity continues to grow and snowball and mushroom through the everyday stuff of life, by the time I get into high school, most of my friends, the highest percentage of my friends, are LDS, Latter-day Saints, Mormons. They are getting more and more serious about their faith. They start going to Latter-day Saint seminaries, which are attached to every school in Utah. So every day from junior high through high school, my friends are going and getting religious education. They carry their Bibles around with them at school during certain times of the year. So even seeing kids carrying Bibles around at school was normal to me in a public school growing up. I was like, oh, you can carry your Bible around at school? Wow. In fact, I began keeping mine in my locker. When all the Mormon kids would carry theirs around, I would bring mine to school and put it in my locker. I had no idea why. I just did it. Like, oh, I have a Bible too. And so religion is normal. Carrying your Bible around is normal. I didn't know what Mormons believed. It just was everywhere. And when you're in school, you go to school, you get, boyfriends and girlfriends. And I got a girlfriend when I was a junior in high school. Her name was Cindy, just a pretty young Mormon girl named Cindy. And, we dated a couple of times, and we were in choir together, and we were in plays together in drama, and we started dating. And in the course of conversation, she told me her dad was a bishop, a Mormon bishop. And I was like, oh, what does that mean? She's like, what? And the question when you're growing up is, what ward are you in? Which was kind of like, as Catholics would say, what parish are you in? Like, what ward church, which church in the neighborhood do you go to? And I said, oh, I'm not a Mormon. And she was freaked out that she's dating this boy who's not a Mormon, because I guess she thought I was one. And she says, would you come and talk to the missionaries at my house? Well, she's gorgeous, beautiful. She makes chocolate chip cookies. She's cute. How am I going to say no? Of course.
Yeah.
Of course I'll come to your house and talk to the missionaries,
Yeah.
And so I had that going on in my life, and at the same time, I was taking a karate class. I started taking karate lessons from a guy, and he identified himself as a born-again Christian. Well, I had no idea what that meant. My dad would say, oh, he's a born-again. So that's where I learned born-again Christian out of the mouth of a Christian, and I learned one of them born agains from my dad. I learned the moniker in the positive and the epithet on the other side, at that time in my life. Oh, he's one of them born agains. So anyway, I'm going to his karate class. Sometimes my girlfriend, Cindy, would come to the karate class and watch me. She even came to a tournament that I fought in. I told my teacher, yeah, I'm thinking about becoming a Mormon. And he said, you need to do some serious investigation. That's not Christianity. Well, that freaked me out. I was like, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean it's not Christianity? And he said, you just need to be careful, man. That's not Christianity. Well, that confused the crap out of me, the heck out of me, whatever words you want to use. What in the world's going on here? I have two people that I care about. They're both saying something very different. And I talked to my parents about it. I was like, Rick, who's my teacher, says Mormons aren't really Christians. And my mom says, if your girlfriend's going to have you reading the Book of Mormon, then you probably should give the Bible equal time. Which I think about it now, it's like the wisdom that comes from my mother, who thinks the Bible is a book written by men to control the world. But that was her advice to me when I was a 17-year-old boy. If you're going to read the Book of Mormon, you should give the Bible equal time. So everything changed in my life right there. I was in kind of this crisis. I was in this time of confusion. I have a crush on a girl. I have a sense of loyalty and love for a guy that I looked up to, my karate teacher, who was kind of a mentor to me. My parents and the swirl that went on in our home, all this stuff is just like a cyclone going around in my life. And at that time in my life, my motives changed. They moved from being wanting to please anybody about my religious pursuits. They switched from that to, I need to know. I guess this is the time in my life where I sort it all out and figure out what I actually believe and make a decision. And so I got so spiritually hungry during that time. I started listening to anything I could listen to on the radio. I started reading everything people would give me. I collected it all. I had a huge bag of books and tracts and pamphlets that I was collecting that everyone wanted to give me, because when you say you're spiritually curious, people start dumping paper on you. Well, that was happening to me. And I came to this kind of crescendo point in the summer after my junior year of high school. It was July, the summer of my junior year of high school. I had sat with the missionaries during the school year. I had listened to them. I had read books, about Mormonism, pro and con arguments. I had listened to people. I'd talked to everybody I could, have a conversation with. Well, on July 24th, 1986, which is a holiday in Salt Lake City, it's Pioneer Day. It's a day that celebrates the arrival and settlement of Mormon pioneers in Utah. So I know there's going to be all kinds of events in downtown Salt Lake City and a lot of activity around the temple. And I decide, you know what? It's time for me to go ask questions. So I go that evening, the 24th of July, to Temple Square in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I find a temple missionary. Get him aside, show him my bag of stuff, and say, he says, well, what are you doing? I say, well, I need to ask you some questions. I think these guys are used to people coming up to him to try to argue with them. So I kind of got the idea that maybe he thought that that's what I wanted to do. So I asked him, how can I know that Mormonism is true? And how can I know that I'm going to go to heaven when I die? Those are my two questions to the temple missionary as a 17-year-old boy in July of 1986. And this temple missionary looks at me and says, many are called, but few are chosen. And he kind of humphed at me. And then he walked away and just left me standing there. And I was shocked, like, what just happened? Like he was mad at me for asking him those questions. Many are called, but few are chosen. Before I tell the next part of the story, which comes right after, maybe I'll take a breath right there.
I'm just trying to think if you're a if you're a LDS missionary and you're used to people picking fights with you, and some punk kid comes up and opens up a backpack full of books, I don't know exactly if I'd be trusting your motives either. You know,
Well, and
I
here's
kind of
the
wonder
thing.
about that.
Yeah. And to his credit, or to give him the benefit of the doubt, I had everything in there, and you could see the titles of different things. And some of it was very pro Latter-day Saint, pro Mormon, and some of it was frankly what a Mormon would call anti-Mormon literature. But I had it all. It was everything people were giving to me. And I
maybe you thought you were
him.
a secret shopper, like you were brought there, you know, to test his skills or something.
But the two questions that I asked him, I was serious. Like, how can I know that your religion or any religion is true? And how can I be sure that I'm going to go to heaven when I die? Which, if you think about street evangelism, it's like a dream come true. Somebody asked me, how can I know what's true and how can I go to heaven when I die? I've never had anybody do that with me, but that was me. I was that guy. I walk up to a guy on the street and ask him that question. And usually that's how evangelistic discussions begin. Do you know what's true? And how would you know if you were going to go to heaven when you die? Yeah, that's where my head was at, you know, as a 17-year-old. So I was discouraged. I was a little shell-shocked by him kind of just walking away from me when I was serious. And I left. I threw my bag over my shoulder and I walked out of Temple Square. If you go there now, it's basically the road that runs east and west on the south side of the temple. Anyone who lives in Utah or has been there knows exactly where this is. There used to be a mall right across the street called Crossroads Plaza when I was a kid. I went out of the gate of that part of the Temple Square onto the street. And as soon as I get out of the square, I hear the sound of tambourines, guitar strumming, and singing, loud singing. I hear this. And I'm thinking, well, it's the 24th of July. It's Pioneer Day. Maybe it's a parade. So I look across the street, walking in front of Crossroads Plaza, and I see a massive cross, moving down the street. And a guy is under it, carrying it. And there's about 50 or 60 people behind him, strumming guitars and tambourines and clapping their hands and singing. And I thought, what? What is that? What in the world is that? And I ran across the street and just jumped into this crowd of people as they're walking east, you know, up the street in Salt Lake City. And I get into this crowd and I got my bag on my shoulder and this guy is standing there and he's like, "Hey man, how you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm fine." He says, "What's your name?" I say, "My name's Kenny." "What's your name?" He says, "My name's David." Well, I would become very good friends with David over the years, and I'm still friends with him to this day. In fact, he came to my seminary graduation. He and I have done mission trips together and all this kind of stuff over the years. But he was the guy I met in the crowd. And he was there in Salt Lake City on a summer of mission with Youth with a Mission. And he was part of this March for Jesus up the street in Salt Lake City. And he says, "What are you doing here?" And I open my bag and I say this to him: "I'm looking for God."
Oh, man.
Every street evangelist's dream come true.
And for years, we would laugh about this. In fact, when I was pastoring, I had him come and speak at our church, and we told the story to our church, and everyone agreed that nothing like this had ever happened to any of them. You know, like it never even happened to me.
I'm looking for God.
I say, "I'm looking for God." And I show him the bag. And he said, "Well, what are you doing?" And I said, "I just went to the Mormon temple." And he said, "Well, why?" And I said, "Well, I asked him, how can I know what's true and how can I know how I'm going to go to heaven when I die?" And he's just staring at me like, "Is this real?" I said, what are you guys doing out here? What is this?" He says, "We're taking this city for Jesus." Like, I did not know what in the world that meant. But we're taking this city for Jesus. And I'm like, oh man. Wow. And he said, "Can we talk?" and it starts to sprinkle outside. And so we get under kind of a storefront cover and we sit down on a bench. The crowd that he's with, all his missionary friends, go up past, where we were. They marched all the way up to, if you're from Salt Lake City, all the way up to the Masonic Temple up the street. And they had a prayer gathering up there. But we stayed back and we sat there on the street in Salt Lake City. And so I say, yeah, I just want to know what's true. And I want to know, how can I go to heaven when I die? I mean, I'm asking this California guy that I just met these questions. And he's got a Bible in his hand, a pen, and a little Mead notebook that he pulls out of his shirt pocket, one of the wire-bound Mead, and he flips it open. He says, okay, John 3:3, you must be born again. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him might not perish but have eternal life. John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And then he writes, for if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus Christ is Lord and that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. And he writes his name and his address in California on the back of this. And he tucks it in my Bible and he says, you can know the truth if you'll just read the Bible. God will speak to you. If you'll just read the Bible, you can know the truth. And you can know you're going to go to heaven when you die if you'll accept Jesus. This is the sort of the evangelical terminology. Accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior and serve him your whole life. And I said, that's it. He said, that's it. He said, do you want to do it now? Do you want to do that now? At this very moment, I hear the voice of my mother. You will decide for yourself when you're old enough. So something about the notion of somebody sitting there and asking me to make a choice with them superintending that process, I pushed back on it. And I said, I know it's something that I need to do, but I have to do it by myself. And so I shoved the little piece of paper into my bag of stuff. He said, can I pray for you? He prayed for me. He left. He walked up the street to be with his friends. And I just sat there like, did that just happen? And I got back in my car. And over the next couple of days, I thought about all that. I thought about all that stuff in my bag. And then I had a talk with 3 people in my life. First, I went to my girlfriend, Cindy. I said, Cindy, I've been to the missionaries. I've listened. I've read too much. I'm sorting through all this. I just know I can't be a Mormon. I can't do it. And I'm sorry if that means that you can't be my girlfriend anymore, which was the case. That was it. It was over. And then I went to my parents and I told them what had happened and that I had made up my mind, just like they told me that I was supposed to. And then I went to the home of my friend, Rick, my karate teacher. And it was really late at night when I went to his house 2 nights after this happened. And I knocked on his door like way after hours. And he came and he's a karate guy. He came to the door in a blanket, like, do I have to fight this person who's at my front door? And he goes, oh, Kenny, what's up? And I said, I just came over because I want you to know that I've made up my mind. And he said, about what? And I said, all this religious stuff. And he said, okay, what have you decided? And I said, I must be born again. I said that to him because that's what David read to me out of the Bible on the street. And he goes, yeah. So he said, do you want, just like David, he said, do you want to pray right now? Or do you want to? I said, I do, but I'm going to do it by myself. And I said, it's okay. Just go inside and, pray for me. And I walked through his front yard back out to my car. and sat on the hood of my car in the evening. It was July 28th or 29th or 25th, something like that, 1986. And I just sat there staring up at the sky. And I said, okay, God, I believe in you. Jesus, I believe in you. And I give you my whole life. And I ask you to forgive me of my sins and take over my whole life. Amen. It was just that very simple prayer. And in that exact moment, I just feel like somebody opened me up from the inside and poured life into me that I could not contain. I was so overwhelmed. I was so overwhelmed by it. I was crying, and other things were spiritual realities were happening to me as I was sitting there. I felt like I was going to go to heaven in that exact moment. And I knew as I sat there on the hood of my car that my life would never be the same. In fact, later, when I would sort of unpack my call to ministry, I would always go back to that moment, because that's when I felt it the first time, was on the hood of my car, that somehow I was going to give my whole life to God. Somehow God was going to use my life for his glory. Somehow I was going to, from that moment on, I was just going to be his. And whatever I did and wherever I went, it was all going to be for God. And that has been the driving energy of my life since I was a 17-year-old kid, trailer park kid in Salt Lake City, in the 80s when I became a Christian. And that's when my life, I would say, even the life I'm living now, the life where I'm the following Jesus life that I live even right now, that is the moment where I stepped across a threshold and I became a Christian as much as I knew how to be a Christian. That's when the beginning happened for me. And probably we could chat a little bit more, but I feel like this is wonderful. A good place to leave people wanting more for next time we talk.
Wonderful story. Incredible. Wow.
So and you're only 17 at this point, which means
so good.
We just gotten this train started. So, and I've heard you share pieces of that before, but never quite as detailed a picture as that. But the other thing I would say is that, this story is going to end a few episodes from now with you in the Catholic Church. And some people will be like, well, that sounds like the opposite of what just happened here. Right? But this is all on a trajectory. It's all on a trajectory.
It is.
It's all one piece of the puzzle. And it's those things that happened to us. I believe it was July a year later when I was an 7-year-old kid.
Yeah.
That I prayed that prayer after Vacation Bible School with Miss Nancy. So
amazing.
And if I hadn't prayed that prayer at that time, I don't know what would be the trajectory of the life, but they're all these moments matter, man. They all matter.
Yeah, they do. You learn as you follow Jesus throughout your life. I like to tell people, this quote isn't original to me, but it's something I've embraced. It takes a long time to learn about Jesus, and it takes a long time to learn to follow Jesus. You have to do it every day for your whole life. And as you look back over it, you learn how to put the pieces together and how they fit, even disparate pieces or pieces that seem internally contradictory or that like they can't go together. You learn to see how they do, over time. And I've been able to do that with lots of stuff in my life. I'm still learning how to do it. Obviously, becoming Catholic adds a whole bunch of stuff to that, as we'll unpack, over time. But yeah, I agree with you there, Matt.
I just love so many of the images. Rick, like, well, really? Well, what have you decided? I must be born again. Anyway,
it sounds like a script from a bad evangelistic video training seminar or something from that time period. It's almost too perfect. I mean, if you're an evangelical Christian and you've been working on somebody and praying for somebody for so long, and they come back and they say that to you, it's like, well then.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I didn't even have language for that until 3 days earlier. Like, I heard the term born again Christian, but no one ever explained what it meant to me. Not even my friend Rick explained what it meant. It was David 3 days earlier on the street who showed it to me in the Bible,
Yeah, vocabulary for what you were experiencing and what you were looking to experience as well. Well, we've got a lot more to this story. And as a matter of fact, now that you have had this experience, you get become a very excited young man. And we're going to get into that in the next episode and where that takes you. But in the meantime, I encourage people to go back and watch other episodes of On the Journey if you want to find out more of where we're all coming from and how we all ended up in the Catholic Church. Looking very much forward to hearing more pieces of Kenny Burchard's story. Check it out at chnetwork.org if you want to find more free resources and everything we got to offer. We've got an online community as well, community.chnetwork.org. And of course, all these episodes and resources and programs and everything is made possible because of our generous partners in mission. We're very grateful to them. If you'd like to join them, check out chnetwork.org/donate. Kenny, thank you. Looking forward to the next stage in your journey.
Thank you, guys.
Me too.
God bless.